Hello everyone and welcome. Today's story comes from Daniel Carter, 54, who thought losing his wife at the same time he lost his job would be the worst day of his life. He had no idea that both of them had underestimated one thing: his silence. This story has been dramatized to protect privacy. AI narration is used throughout, but the emotions and events are presented as a realistic personal account. So grab a coffee, get comfortable, and let me tell you how everything changed because of one ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The coffee had gone cold. That's the first thing I remember. Not the email that had just appeared on my screen. Not the rain beating against the office windows. Not even the fact that my wife would end our marriage less than 15 minutes later. It was the coffee. I'd bought it at exactly 8:17 that morning from the cafe across the street. A medium black coffee. No sugar, no cream. The same order I'd been buying every workday for almost 9 years. When I finally picked up the cup again, it was completely cold. I don't know why that detail stayed with me. Maybe because life has a strange habit of attaching itself to meaningless things, while the moments that actually destroy you arrive so quietly. You don't even hear them walking toward you. Outside, the October rain painted long gray lines across the glass walls of our office building in downtown Phoenix. Inside, everyone kept working. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, printers humming. It was just another Tuesday. At least, that's what I believed. Then my office phone rang. Not my cell phone, the office line. Hardly anyone used it anymore. I answered without looking. "Daniel?" It was Melissa, my assistant. Her voice sounded different, too careful, almost nervous. "Your wife is downstairs." I smiled without thinking. "Emily?" "Yeah." Melissa hesitated. "But she's not alone." I looked through the glass wall of my office toward the lobby below. At first, I couldn't recognize either face. Then, the elevator doors opened. Emily stepped out first. She was wearing the navy blue dress I bought her for our anniversary dinner 2 years earlier. She only wore that dress on special occasions, or when she wanted to impress someone. The man walking beside her was wearing an expensive charcoal suit. Even from 3 floors above, I recognized him instantly. Richard Lawson, my CEO. The man I'd worked under for almost 9 years. The man who had shaken my hand exactly 3 hours earlier and thanked me for my loyalty. Neither of them looked up. Neither of them knew. I was already watching. I stayed where I was. I didn't wave. I didn't call her. I just watched. Funny how your instincts notice the smallest things before your heart accepts what's happening. Richard wasn't walking beside Emily. He was walking slightly ahead of her, like someone who already knew where they were going. Emily wasn't nervous. That was the first thing that frightened me. After 26 years of marriage, I knew every version of her. I knew the smile she used around strangers, the one she wore at family dinners when something was bothering her, the smile she forced whenever my mother called unexpectedly, and I knew the look she had whenever she was about to ask me for something expensive. But this, I'd never seen before. She looked peaceful, not happy, not excited, just certain, as if she'd already lived through this moment 100 times inside her head. Melissa appeared outside my office. She knocked softly. "They're asking for you downstairs." I nodded. "I'll be there in a minute." She didn't leave. She stood there awkwardly, like she wanted to warn me about something, but didn't know if she should. "Melissa?" She looked at the floor. "I've worked here 6 years, Daniel. I've never seen Mr. Lawson come to the lobby himself." That sentence stayed with me. Richard Lawson never left the executive floor unless investors visited or someone important arrived. Today, the important person was apparently my wife. I buttoned my jacket, picked up my cold coffee, then smiled to myself. I don't know why I carried that cup downstairs. Maybe because part of me still believed I'd walk back into my office 10 minutes later, finish my coffee, answer a few emails, and go home like every other Tuesday. Looking back now, I realized something. The human mind protects itself. When the truth is standing right in front of you, sometimes your brain refuses to let you see it, until it's too late. The elevator ride from the 7th floor to the lobby took less than 30 seconds. It felt like 30 years. Every floor that passed felt like another chance for someone to say, "Daniel, it's all a misunderstanding." Nobody did. When the doors finally opened, Emily was already waiting. Richard stood a few feet behind her, his hands comfortably inside his coat pockets, smiling. Not the smile of a man greeting an employee, the smile of a man who believed he had already won, and that was the moment I realized this wasn't a surprise visit. It was a performance, and I was the only person who hadn't been given the script. Emily looked at me for a second. No smile, no warmth, not even guilt. Just distance. The kind of distance that doesn't appear overnight. It grows quietly, one conversation at a time, until one day, the person standing in front of you feels like someone you've never met. Daniel. Her voice was calm. We need to talk. I looked at Richard. Privately? Before Emily could answer, Richard spoke first. I think it's better if we handle this here. There was something about the way he said handle this. Like he wasn't talking about my marriage. He was talking about a meeting, a problem, a file that needed to be closed before lunch. I slowly looked around the lobby. People weren't staring, not openly, but office buildings have their own way of listening. The receptionist suddenly became fascinated by her keyboard. Two accountants stopped walking, but pretended to check something on a notice board. The security guard looked toward the revolving door, then looked away again. Everyone knew something was about to happen. Emily reached into her handbag. For one impossible second, I honestly thought she was pulling out an anniversary photo. Or maybe the medical results she'd been waiting for. Anything except what came next. Instead, she placed a white envelope on the small glass table beside the lobby chairs. She gently pushed it toward me. I've already signed. I looked at the envelope. Didn't touch it. My name was printed neatly across the front. Daniel Carter. Nothing else. No heart. No handwritten note. No explanation. Just my name. Like I was receiving another business document. Another contract. Another Tuesday afternoon task. What is it? Even asking the question felt strange. Because somewhere inside, I already knew. Emily took a slow breath. Divorce papers. The lobby disappeared. Not literally, but the sounds, the conversations, the ringing phones. Everything around me faded into silence. I could still see people moving. I just couldn't hear them anymore. 26 years, reduced to one envelope. I finally looked at Richard. He still hadn't said a word. He didn't have to. The confidence on his face said enough. He believed this was the moment my life ended. He had absolutely no idea. It was the moment his own future quietly began to fall apart. I didn't reach for the envelope. Not immediately. I just stood there, looking at my own name printed across the front. It's strange. You spend 26 years building a marriage, and somehow, the last thing left of it fits inside a 9x12 envelope. Emily shifted her weight. She was waiting. Not for my signature, for my reaction. Richard was waiting too. Men like Richard always expect noise, anger, raised voices, threats, maybe even tears. Because once a man loses control, he also loses credibility. I could almost see the story they'd rehearsed on the drive over. Daniel will make a scene. Security might have to step in. Everyone will see why this marriage couldn't work. I looked up at Emily. How long? She frowned slightly. What? How long has this been going on? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced at Richard. Just for a second. But 26 years of marriage teaches you something. Sometimes, a single glance says more than 1,000 words. I don't think that matters anymore, she replied quietly. It matters to me. Richard finally stepped forward. Daniel, this isn't the place. I turned toward him. No, it became your place the moment you decided to stand here. For the first time, his smile disappeared. Not completely, just enough for me to know. I'd interrupted the version of this conversation he'd imagined. Emily folded her arms. I'm tired, Daniel. Tired of waiting. Tired of believing that one day everything would finally get better. I've spent years hoping you'd become someone bigger than this. Someone bigger than this. Those words didn't hurt because they were cruel. They hurt because I realized she'd been measuring my worth by things I'd never cared about. The title on my office door, the size of my paycheck, the car in the parking garage. Not the nights I stayed awake while she recovered from surgery. Not the weekends I spent renovating the house with my own hands. Not the promises I'd actually kept. Just the things money could buy. I looked down at the envelope again. Then, without another word, I picked it up. And that's when something unexpected happened. A folded photograph slipped out from underneath the papers and landed face down on the polished lobby floor. I didn't know it yet, But that single photograph was about to tell me far more than the divorce papers ever could. The photograph landed face down. Nobody moved. Not Emily. Not Richard. Not even me. For a few seconds, the entire lobby seemed to be holding its breath. I bent down and picked it up. It was an old picture, about 6 months old maybe. The three of us were standing at the company's annual charity gala. Richard was in the middle. Emily stood beside him. I stood on the other side. I remembered that night. I'd left early because one of our warehouse employees had been injured in an accident. Richard had stayed. Emily had insisted she'd find her own ride home. At the time, I hadn't questioned it. Marriage teaches you trust. Sometimes, too much trust. I turned the photo over. On the back, someone had written in black ink, the beginning of our new life. No signature, no date, just that one sentence. For the first time, Emily's expression changed, only slightly, but I saw it. She hadn't expected me to read the back. Richard reached toward the photograph. That's enough. I stepped back before he could touch it. No, I think I'll keep this. His jaw tightened. It isn't yours. I looked him straight in the eyes. It landed at my feet. Seems like life wanted me to have it. Neither of them smiled this time. Good, because I wasn't smiling either. I slipped the photograph into the inside pocket of my jacket. Not because it proved anything. Legally, it proved nothing. But emotionally, it answered the only question I'd been asking. How long had I been the only one who didn't know? Emily took a slow breath. Daniel, I never wanted to hurt you. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because people always say that, right after they've chosen the one thing guaranteed to hurt you. I looked around the lobby. Everyone was pretending not to watch, but I knew they were listening. Every word, every silence, every breath. I picked up the envelope again. I'll have my attorney review it. Richard frowned. We were hoping you'd sign today. There it was. Not concern, not compassion, urgency. That single sentence told me something my heart had been too broken to notice until now. They didn't just want a divorce. They needed it quickly. And for the first time that afternoon, instead of feeling broken, I became curious. Why were they in such a hurry? Richard looked at his watch. Not dramatically, just a quick glance. The kind people make when they're expecting something to happen on a schedule. That tiny movement bothered me more than the divorce papers. People who are ending a marriage don't usually watch the time. People waiting for something do. Emily noticed him checking his watch. So did I, for just a fraction of a second. Their eyes met. No words, no signals, just recognition, like two people making sure they were still following the same plan. I'd spent nearly 12 years in corporate management, long enough to know one thing. Whenever people become impatient, it's usually because they're working against a deadline. And suddenly, the divorce wasn't the only thing I was thinking about anymore. There was something else, something they weren't telling me. I slipped the envelope under my arm. I'll let my attorney contact yours. Richard's smile disappeared completely. There's really no reason to delay this. I looked at him. Funny? I was about to say the same thing. He frowned. What do you mean? I mean, I've worked for this company long enough to know people don't rush paperwork unless paperwork affects something bigger. Neither of them answered. That silence told me more than any confession ever could. Emily finally spoke. Daniel, please don't make this complicated. I nodded slowly. That's exactly what I'm trying to avoid. I turned toward the revolving doors. Daniel. Emily called my name one last time. I stopped, but I didn't turn around. I truly hope, one day, you'll understand. For a moment, I almost answered. Then I realized something. When someone has already decided your story for you, they're no longer listening to your words. So I simply walked away. Outside, the rain had almost stopped. The city looked exactly the same as it had an hour earlier. Cars moved. People crossed the street. A man walked past carrying a pizza box. The world hadn't changed. Only mine had. I unlocked my truck, sat behind the steering wheel, and placed the divorce papers on the passenger seat. I didn't start the engine. Instead, I stared through the windshield, trying to understand why Richard Lawson, a man worth tens of millions of dollars, seemed far more interested in my signature than my wife did. That question stayed with me all the way home, and before sunset, I would accidentally find the first piece of an answer neither of them ever imagined I would discover. The house felt too quiet, not because Emily had taken most of her things, Because silence sounds different when you realize it isn't temporary. I unlocked the front door, dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl by the entrance. The same bowl Emily bought from a weekend market in Sedona. She'd spent 20 minutes choosing it. Funny how the little things survive, long after the people who chose them are gone. I loosened my tie, walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator. There was half a bottle of orange juice, leftover Chinese food, and the lasagna I'd made Sunday night. Enough food for two. Now, enough for one. I poured myself a glass of water, then noticed something sitting on the kitchen counter. A stack of unopened mail. I almost ignored it. Most people don't realize this, but when your life falls apart, even opening envelopes starts feeling like work. Bills, insurance, advertisements, things that belonged to the version of your life that no longer existed. I carried the stack to the dining table, sat down, started opening them one by one. Electric bill, water bill, property tax notice, a credit card statement. Nothing unusual. Then, near the bottom, I found an envelope I didn't recognize. Thick, cream-colored, heavier than the others. My full name, Daniel Michael Carter. Not just Daniel Carter, my full legal name. Almost nobody used my middle name anymore. No company logo, no advertising, just a law firm's return address. Harrison & Cole Attorneys at Law, downtown Phoenix. I frowned. I'd never heard of them. For a second, I honestly thought it was another legal notice. Maybe Emily's attorney had already sent something else. Maybe another document waiting for my signature. I almost placed it back on the table. Tomorrow. I'll deal with it tomorrow. Then something stopped me. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe, after the day I'd just survived, I no longer believed in coincidences. I slid my finger under the envelope, carefully opened it, and unfolded the letter inside. The first line immediately caught my attention. Dear Mr. Daniel Michael Carter, we have been attempting to contact you regarding the estate of Mr. William Carter. William Carter. I read the name again, slowly. My uncle, a man I hadn't seen in almost 24 years. The last time we'd spoken, he shook my hand, looked me in the eyes, and said something I'd never forgotten. One day, you'll understand why I stayed away. After that, he disappeared from my life. No phone calls, no birthdays, nothing. Now, a law firm wanted to discuss his estate. I leaned back in my chair, completely forgetting about the divorce papers still lying unopened beside me. Because for the first time that day, my wife, my boss, and the broken marriage were no longer the biggest mystery sitting on my table. The letter ended with one sentence. We respectfully request your presence at our office tomorrow morning. The matter is both confidential and time-sensitive. I stared at those last two words. Time-sensitive. Suddenly, Richard's urgency, Emily's pressure, and this unexpected letter didn't feel like three separate events anymore. They felt connected. I just didn't know how. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of Emily, not because of Richard, because of the letter. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept hearing my uncle's voice. One day, you'll understand why I stayed away. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I walked into the kitchen, made coffee, and read the letter again. Nothing had changed. The words were still there, formal, carefully written, almost cold, but underneath every sentence, I could feel urgency. The next morning, I arrived 15 minutes early. The law office occupied the top 2 floors of a glass tower overlooking downtown Phoenix. I'd driven past the building hundreds of times. I'd never imagined I'd walk inside. The lobby smelled of polished wood, fresh coffee, and expensive silence. A receptionist smiled. Good morning. You must be Mr. Carter. I nodded. She already knew my name. That was unusual. She didn't ask me to sign in, didn't ask for identification. She simply stood. Mr. Harrison is waiting for you. Waiting. Not available. Waiting. Another detail that didn't seem important. Until later. The elevator stopped on the 21st floor. When the doors opened, everything felt different. No ringing phones. No people rushing through hallways. Only quiet footsteps and framed photographs of men in suits shaking hands with governors, judges, and business leaders. This wasn't an ordinary law office. This was the kind of place where people came when billions changed hands. A man in his late 60s stood as I entered the conference room. Silver hair, dark navy suit, Perfect posture. He walked around the table and shook my hand with both of his. Daniel, it's good to finally meet you. Finally. That word caught my attention. You've been expecting me? He smiled. For a very long time. I frowned. I'm sorry. I think you have me confused with someone else. No, I assure you, I don't. He waited until I sat down. Then he placed a leather folder in front of me. Didn't open it. Didn't slide it across. He simply rested his hand on it. Almost respectfully. I worked with your uncle for 31 years. He spoke about you often. I stared at him. That's impossible. I met him once. When I was 30. The attorney nodded slowly. I know. He wanted it that way. Those 6 words created more questions than answers. I leaned forward. If my uncle cared so much, why did he disappear? The attorney looked out the window for a moment, as if remembering someone he'd respected. Then he looked back at me. Because he believed the only way to know a man's character was to watch what he became. When nobody was helping him, I didn't say anything. Neither did he. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It felt important. Then he opened the leather folder. Inside were documents, dozens of them. Some looked decades old. Others had been signed only weeks earlier. He carefully turned the first page toward me. Before we discuss your inheritance, there's something about your company that you need to know. My heartbeat slowed. Not faster, slower. Because suddenly, Richard Lawson's face flashed through my mind. Then Emily's. Then the divorce papers sitting unopened on my kitchen table. The attorney looked directly into my eyes and quietly said, Your wife wasn't the first person trying to get something from you. She was simply the latest. I looked at him for several seconds. I don't understand. I'm just a regional operations manager. What could anyone possibly want from me? Mr. Harrison didn't answer immediately. Instead, he removed a yellowed envelope from the folder. The paper looked old, very old. The edges had begun to fade. This, he said quietly, was written by your uncle almost 15 years ago. My instructions were simple. If anything ever happened to him, this letter was to be given only to you. And only after I was absolutely certain. You were ready. Ready? I almost laughed. My wife just handed me divorce papers. My boss was standing beside her. I've barely slept. I don't feel ready for anything. For the first time, Mr. Harrison smiled. A man never realizes he's ready until life leaves him no other choice. He handed me the letter. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the signature at the bottom, I remembered that. William Carter, my uncle. I unfolded the page carefully. The first sentence made me stop breathing. Daniel, if you're reading this, it means they finally made their move. I looked up. They? Mr. Harrison nodded slowly. Keep reading. I swallowed hard. The next line hit even harder. For years, people have tried to reach me through my business. One day, they would try to reach me through you. I frowned. What does that mean? Mr. Harrison leaned back. Your uncle built companies. Real companies. But the one everyone knew about was never the one that mattered. He opened another folder. Inside was a corporate ownership chart. It wasn't simple. It stretched across several pages. Holding companies, investment firms, subsidiaries, real estate partnerships, dozens of names connected by lines. He pointed to the very top. Carter Global Holdings. Then, without saying a word, his finger slowly moved downward, through every layer, until it stopped at a name I recognized immediately. Lawson Industrial Group. My stomach tightened. Richard Lawson. Same surname, same company family. No, I whispered. Mr. Harrison looked directly at me. Yes, the company you've worked for has been part of your uncle's business empire. For almost 20 years. I stared at the page. Richard had spent years acting like he owned everything, giving orders, humiliating employees, treating people as if their futures depended entirely on him. And now, I was looking at documents suggesting he had never actually been at the top. Not even close. I slowly looked back at Mr. Harrison. So, what exactly did my uncle leave me? Mr. Harrison closed the folder, folded his hands together, and said the one sentence that completely changed the direction of my life. Daniel, as of 3 weeks ago, You became the majority owner of everything Richard Lawson believes belongs to him. For several seconds, neither of us spoke, because some truths are simply too large to understand all at once. I didn't touch the folder, not because I didn't believe him, because I was afraid that if I did, everything would suddenly become real. The conference room felt unusually quiet. Somewhere outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Phoenix continued exactly as it always had. Traffic moved. People hurried across crosswalks. Someone laughed on the sidewalk below. The world hadn't changed. Mine had. I finally looked up. "How much?" Mr. Harrison didn't answer immediately. Instead, he folded his glasses, placed them carefully on the table, and looked directly into my eyes. "Daniel, I've been asked that question many times, and I've learned something. The number is never the important part. It's what the number controls." He turned another page in the folder. Rows of company names, real estate, investment firms, manufacturing plants, technology holdings. Then, my eyes stopped on one familiar name, Lawson Industrial Group. My heartbeat quickened. "I know that company." "You should," Mr. Harrison replied calmly. "It's the parent company of Lawson Executive Holdings, which owns the company where you've worked for the last 9 years. I leaned back slowly. "So Richard doesn't own it?" Mr. Harrison smiled. "He owns shares, a respectable amount. But ownership," he tapped the document once, "is something entirely different." I stared at the page. For 9 years, I'd watched Richard walk through those office halls as if every employee existed because he allowed it. Every decision, every promotion, every humiliation. He behaved like a king, and kings rarely stop to ask, "Who owns the castle?" I looked at Mr. Harrison again. "So, when does this transfer happen?" His expression changed, more serious now. "It already happened." I frowned. "What do you mean?" 3 weeks ago, the day your uncle passed away. Every controlling share transferred into the Carter family trust." He paused. "You are now the sole beneficiary." The room fell silent again. 3 weeks. Exactly 3 weeks. The same timeline. Emily's behavior. Richard's sudden confidence. The pressure to sign the divorce papers immediately. The urgency. The strange looks. The carefully rehearsed conversation. Every piece suddenly began sliding into place. Almost. Too perfectly. I looked back at the divorce papers still sticking out of my briefcase. They couldn't have known. Mr. Harrison didn't answer. Instead, he opened one final envelope. "There is one more thing." He removed a single handwritten page. "Your uncle left specific instructions." I unfolded it carefully. Only one paragraph. No legal language. No signatures. Just his handwriting. "Daniel, if the day ever comes when you inherit everything I've built, promise me one thing. Never make a decision while you're angry. Patient men build empires. Impatient men destroy them." I read it twice. Then a third time. Mr. Harrison quietly broke the silence. "Your uncle believed that anyone can inherit money, but very few people are worthy of inheriting responsibility." I slowly folded the letter, placed it back inside the envelope. Then I looked out across the city. For the first time since Emily walked into my office, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about something much more dangerous. Patience. Because I had just realized something. Richard Lawson still believed. He was the most powerful man in the company, and if I played this correctly, he might continue believing that, just long enough to destroy himself. The next morning, I went back to work, exactly the way I had every weekday for the past 9 years. Same parking garage, same security gate, same elevator, same coffee. If anyone had looked at me, they would have seen the same Daniel Carter they'd seen every morning for nearly a decade. And that was exactly what I wanted. Because the most dangerous advantage a person can have is knowing something, while everyone else believes you know nothing. The receptionist smiled. "Morning, Daniel." "Morning, Lisa." Nothing unusual, nothing forced. I wasn't acting. I was simply refusing to let my emotions make decisions my mind hadn't approved yet. When the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, Richard Lawson was already there, talking to 2 department directors, laughing, confident, comfortable, exactly the way he'd looked the day before, standing beside my wife. He noticed me. "Daniel," his voice carried across the hallway. "You got a minute?" I smiled politely. "Of course." He placed a hand on my shoulder. Friendly, too friendly. "I just wanted to check in. I know yesterday wasn't easy. There it was. The performance. The concerned executive. The sympathetic mentor. If I hadn't known what I knew, I might have believed him. I appreciate that, I answered calmly. He studied my face, almost searching for something. Anger, bitterness, anything. Instead, he found nothing. That seemed to bother him. You've handled everything surprisingly well. I shrugged. Life keeps moving. For a split second, his smile faltered. Not because of what I said, because of what I didn't say. I wasn't begging. I wasn't blaming. I wasn't asking questions. I wasn't giving him the satisfaction he'd been expecting. Later that afternoon, I walked past the executive conference room. The glass walls were partially covered, but not completely. Inside, I saw Richard and Emily. She wasn't supposed to be there. She didn't work for the company. Yet there she was, sitting beside him. Richard was pointing at a document spread across the table. Emily nodded. Then, Richard laughed. The same laugh he'd worn in the lobby while she handed me divorce papers. I stopped walking, only for a second, long enough to notice one small detail. The document between them had our company logo printed across the top. Why was my wife discussing company documents? With my CEO? I kept walking, didn't stare, didn't react. Because my uncle's words echoed in my mind. Never make a decision while you're angry. So I did what neither of them expected. I walked back to my office, closed the door, picked up my phone, and called Mr. Harrison. I think, I said quietly, they're after something much bigger than my marriage. There was a brief silence on the other end. Then he replied, I was hoping you'd notice that. My grip tightened around the phone. What aren't you telling me? Mr. Harrison took a slow breath. Daniel, before your uncle passed away, someone inside your company tried to buy his controlling shares. I felt my heartbeat stop. And your uncle refused. Suddenly, my divorce no longer looked personal. It looked like the opening move in a much larger game. The board meeting began at exactly 9 o'clock. No dramatic entrance, no cameras, no reporters, just 12 executives, 3 board members, company counsel, and Richard Lawson sitting halfway down the polished walnut table, completely unaware that this would be his last meeting. I entered the room quietly, not as an employee, not as a department manager, but as the man whose signature now carried more authority than anyone else's inside that building. Richard looked up. His expression barely changed. For a moment, I could almost see him trying to understand why I had been invited. He assumed someone had made a mistake. He even smiled. The same confident smile I'd watched for years. The same smile he'd worn beside my wife while she handed me divorce papers. Mr. Harrison closed the conference room door. Every conversation stopped. He placed a leather folder in front of every board member. Then he spoke. Ladies and gentlemen, before today's agenda begins, I'd like to formally introduce the new majority shareholder of Carter Global Holdings, Mr. Daniel Michael Carter. Silence. Not polite silence. The kind of silence that changes careers. Richard frowned, then laughed once. A short, confused laugh. Is this some kind of joke? Nobody answered. Mr. Harrison simply handed him one final document. Richard looked down. His smile disappeared. He turned the first page, then the second. His breathing changed. This can't be right. It is, Mr. Harrison replied calmly. The ownership transfer became legally effective 3 weeks ago. Exactly. The same week my wife asked for a divorce. Richard slowly looked at me. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked uncertain. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I simply opened another folder. The audit is complete. The projector came to life. Vendor fraud, hidden executive bonuses, safety violations, suppressed harassment settlements. Every accusation, supported by evidence. Every page, dated, signed, verified. No opinions, only facts. I spent 11 years working under Richard Lawson. I never once raised my voice. I wasn't about to start now. When the final slide disappeared, I closed the folder. Richard Lawson, your employment is terminated immediately. Your executive benefits are revoked. Your access to every Carter Global property ends today. And our legal department has been instructed to cooperate fully with civil and criminal investigators. Richard pushed back his chair. This is revenge. His voice echoed through the room. "You destroyed my career because of your wife." I met his eyes. "No, my wife only showed me where I needed to start looking." Security entered quietly. Richard looked around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to defend him. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because power built on fear always disappears the moment fear is gone. As security escorted him toward the door, he stopped beside me. "You think you've won?" I looked at him calmly. "I never came here to win. I came here to fix what you broke." He walked out without another word. The room remained silent, not because Richard Lawson had lost everything, but because everyone present had just witnessed something far more powerful. A man who had every reason to seek revenge, choose justice instead. Final scene, 3 months later. 3 months passed. The warehouse received every piece of safety equipment employees had requested for years. Over time, policies changed. Promotion reviews became transparent. Employees stopped lowering their voices whenever management walked by. Pete called me one Friday afternoon. "You know, I've worked here 18 years. This is the first time it actually feels like someone upstairs knows our names." That sentence stayed with me longer than any congratulation. Emily called once. Just once. Her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. I made the biggest mistake of my life. I stood on the back porch with a cup of coffee in my hands, watching the Arizona sunset settle over the neighborhood for a long moment. I didn't answer. Finally, I said, "You didn't make a mistake, Emily. You made a decision. And decisions have a way of introducing us to the people we really are." She cried softly. Then the line went silent. I never heard from her again. Sometimes people ask me if inheriting a fortune changed my life. The truth? It didn't. The money didn't change me. The boardroom didn't change me. Even Richard Lawson didn't change me. The hardest day of my life did. The afternoon my wife walked into my office with divorce papers. I thought I'd lost everything. Looking back, I understand something now. Sometimes life has to remove the people who only loved your position before it reveals the purpose waiting behind your pain. Real power isn't proving people wrong. Real power is quietly becoming the person they never believed you could be. And the funny thing is, the cold cup of coffee I left sitting on my desk that Tuesday morning was still there when I came back, exactly where I'd left it. Only now, I finally understood. It was never the coffee that had gone cold. It was my old life. If this story reminded you that patience is sometimes stronger than revenge, let me know in the comments. What would you have done in Daniel's place? And if you enjoyed this journey, subscribe for more stories where quiet strength changes everything. 3 months passed. The warehouse received every piece of safety equipment employees had requested for years. Over time, policies changed. Promotion reviews became transparent. Employees stopped lowering their voices whenever management walked by. Pete called me one Friday afternoon. "You know, I've worked here 18 years. This is the first time it actually feels like someone upstairs knows our names." That sentence stayed with me longer than any congratulation. Emily called once. Just once. Her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. I made the biggest mistake of my life. I stood on the back porch with a cup of coffee in my hands, watching the Arizona sunset settle over the neighborhood for a long moment. I didn't answer. Finally, I said, "You didn't make a mistake, Emily. You made a decision. And decisions have a way of introducing us to the people we really are." She cried softly. Then the line went silent. I never heard from her again. Sometimes people ask me if inheriting a fortune changed my life. The truth? It didn't. The money didn't change me. The boardroom didn't change me. Even Richard Lawson didn't change me. The hardest day of my life did. The afternoon my wife walked into my office with divorce papers. I thought I'd lost everything. Looking back, I understand something now. Sometimes life has to remove the people who only loved your position before it reveals the purpose waiting behind your pain. Real power isn't proving people wrong. Real power is quietly becoming the person they never believed you could be. And the funny thing is, the cold cup of coffee I left sitting on my desk that Tuesday morning was still there when I came back, exactly where I'd left it. Only now, I finally understood. It was never the coffee that had gone cold. It was my old life. If this story reminded you that patience is sometimes stronger than revenge, let me know in the comments. What would you have done in Daniel's place? And if you enjoyed this journey, Subscribe for more stories where quiet strength changes everything.